Bonjour.
Bonjour, bonjour à tous. It's so nice to see you all. Let's see, let's get everybody in here.
You are viewing James' screen.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to ask you guys is to put yourselves on mute.
Mute.
Yes, on mute so that we don't have any background noises and interruptions or disturbances during the presentation. Super. So I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. We have a great little, or James has a great little presentation for you. It is
I hope so.
a stroll in the streets of the 5e arrondissement, the 5th arrondissement, with a few stops, at some of the historical sites. So James will, tell you a little bit about each site, and I think it's very enjoyable. A little bit like last time, if you have any questions or comments along the way, please put them in the chat. James may decide midway to pause a little bit, and we can address some of the questions or some of the comments, or perhaps we'll go through to the end, and then there will be time to address questions and comments at that point. Let's see, again, if you're just coming in, hello, and put yourselves on mute.
Mute.
Exactement. I will let James introduce himself.
Yes.
When the time comes, and he will just launch into the presentation.
Oh, you know me.
Well, I do. I don't know about.
I do love to launch on presentations right away.
There you go. There you go. So I'm recording the presentation. So if anybody would like the recording, after the fact, just send me an email and I will be happy to share the recording with you guys. Okay, so James, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then just go ahead.
Well, hi everybody. My name is James Minette, and so first of all, let me see if my presentation works.
Oh, well, that would be good. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, it is. It is working. Great. So I'm James Minette, and I live in Paris. And I invite you today to go through a virtual stroll through the fascinating streets of Paris. So what are my qualifications to do that? Well, first of all, I live in Paris, and I've lived in Paris for most of my life. I'm a Paris enthusiast, and I'm also a history buff. So I have a lot to share with you. And I also happen to be Victoria Minette's brother. So we do share a connection through the Alliance Française. And we wanted to create this hour of presentation to give you the opportunity of discovering Paris, maybe through a different lens, the lens of somebody who lives there and who will focus, of course, on historical sites, but maybe give you information that you're not privy to. So let's start. So for those who were there last time we focused on a neighborhood we know very well, Victoria and I, the neighborhood we grew up in, Montmartre. This time, we're going to focus on the neighborhood I lived in for like a long time, but a long time ago when I was very young. So the 5th. And we will go through different stops. So we're going to start at the Parisienne, and we're going to focus on the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève. Then we'll go to the Lycée Henri IV, and let me show you with my little arrow. So that's the Lycée Henri IV. Then we will walk virtually to the Place of la Contrescarpe, and then walk down one of the oldest streets in Paris called La Rue Mouffetard, which will lead us, and then go back up, which will lead us to one of the nicest places in Paris and one of my favorite places, the Place Monge. And we'll spend a few minutes virtually discovering their open market. And then we will go to probably a place that very few people in Paris know, which is the Arène de Lutèce, which is the old Roman amphitheater that is still open to the public, where 2,000 years ago, gladiators were playing in the arena. So it's a little strange to think that gladiators actually existed in Paris a long time ago, but they did. And then we'll go to another exotic place. We'll go to the Great Mosque of Paris. You know that France has a huge population of a Muslim population, and this mosque is the first mosque that was built in Paris, and it's still considered the main mosque of the Muslim faith in France. And then we'll end at the Jardin des Plantes, which can be translated as the garden of the plants, but more than the garden, it's like the main center of botanical geological studies, and it has a wonderful botanical garden. So very different places, a lot of history. I have a few pointers here and there on everyday life, but if you're ready, let's move forward. So where do we start? So first, where are we in Paris? If you don't know Paris, Paris is more or less a circle, and with the Seine that basically cuts it in half. So we are on the left bank, east of the Luxembourg Gardens. So in one of the oldest neighborhoods of Paris. So why did I want to start there? Well, because I think it's a very interesting part of the city. So the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève, if you've ever been to the Panthéon, the Panthéon is this big monument, but we'll cover it in a few minutes. If you've ever been to the Panthéon, you've been in one of the oldest parts of the city. The Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève was built on the remains of the Abbey of Sainte-Geneviève, which was founded in the 6th century by Clovis I. So Clovis I is a very important king in French history because he was the first Frankish king, and he is the first Frankish king that became Christian, that was baptized. And a lot of the historians believe that France entered into Christianity through this baptism. So it's a very important part. And he founded in the 6th century the Abbey of Saint Geneviève. So it is really one of the oldest parts of the city that still remains. So the abbey is built on a place called La Montagne Sainte-Geneviève. So montagne, if you know a little bit of French, means mountain. So of course, it's not a mountain. It's just barely a hill. But I think to give it more of a certain, more prestige, it was decided that it has always been called the Montagne Sainte-Geneviève. So what you have here is the reading hall of the bibliothèque. So it's still, even if it's like a big historical site and where visitors are welcome to visit, it's still the main inter-university library of the University of Paris. So the University of Paris is basically what you call the Sorbonne. So the Sorbonne, as you know, is a 1,000-year-old university. But this building here is fairly new because it was built on the remains of the Abbey, which doesn't exist anymore. And it was built between 1838 and 1851 by a famous French architect called Henri Labrousse. And it's very famous for its very innovative iron frame supporting roof. So the bibliothèque in itself, aside from being like a place dedicated to the studies of thousands of students every year, is one of the main libraries in the world, which contains more than 2 million documents. And it's also open to the public. It holds and it's also very important because it holds 226 volumes dating from the 13th century, including illuminated Bibles, commentaries, and ecclesiastical histories. And So you have here like one example, which is a document, a manuscript called the Manuscript of Livy, showing the foundation of Rome. So you can actually go in the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève and discover these wonderful manuscripts, which are some of them are in incredible good shape, in great preservation. And if you know that these manuscripts were used by some of the most prestigious medieval scholars like Peter Abelard, who was one of the key philosophers and scholastic thinkers in the 12th and 13th century, it's quite remarkable to note, to realize that we still have all of that culture that is available. So it really is one of the most interesting parts of city, and it's really great to see that the remains of the medieval part of the city is still available. So this is like where the library itself is housed. So you can see like the inside of the library, this is a fairly modern building. It's, it has a certain prestige, but just imagine 800 or 900 years ago, this was a medieval abbey. So just in front of if you are coming out of the library, the first thing you'll see is the statue of Pierre Corneille. So if you know anything about French literature, you might know Pierre Corneille. He's very famous for one of his plays called The Cid, which is, I think, which was adapted into a musical. No, sorry. No, sorry, I'm confusing my Spanish. But I know there was a Charlotte Heston movie made from the play with Sophia Loren playing his love interest. So he's a very famous playwright, and because of his fame and the importance he holds in French literature, he has, of course, a place in one of the most prestigious parts of the city, just between the Pantheon and the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève. So the statue itself was originally a bronze statue. Like many monuments in Paris, it was built in the 19th century. The revolution was a fairly chaotic time, and a lot of things were destroyed during the revolution. So when things settled in Paris, a lot of things were built. And as we discussed last time, most of the buildings in Paris date from the 19th century. So that's why it's so interesting to see remains from the relics from the medieval time, because that medieval presence has nearly disappeared entirely. And throughout our walk today, our stroll, we'll see here and there old relics of the past. So now that's probably the most famous building in that area, and one that you've probably already visited. And that's why I didn't put it, front and center, because I didn't want to give you the obvious tourist tour. I wanted to give you like a enthusiast, and the stroll of an enthusiast. So the Pantheon. So what is the Pantheon? So the Pantheon is is not a church, even though you can see the cross built put on top of the dome. It's actually a mausoleum, and it's the place where all the really famous French people are buried. So people like Jean Jaurès, people like François Mitterrand are buried there. So it was built, the actual building was supposed to be a church, and it was built between 1758 and 1790, and it was supposed to be dedicated to the patron saint of Paris, Sainte Geneviève. So there are two patron saints in Paris. There's Sainte Geneviève, and she was a French holy woman in the 6th century who supposedly helped negotiate a peace treaty with the Huns but that's maybe more legend. And the other one is Saint-Denis, which we discussed last time, he wasn't as lucky as Saint-Geneviève. He was decapitated and carried his head on top of the Montmartre. So Saint-Denis and Saint-Geneviève are the patron saints of Paris. And this church was built between 1750 and 1790 to be dedicated to Saint-Geneviève. Unfortunately, there's an event called the French Revolution that started in 1789. So when the church was built, it was decided that it would not be consecrated and it would become a mausoleum for the remains of the distinguished French citizens. So as I said, Émile Zola, Jean Jaurès, François Mitterrand. I think the Général de Gaulle is also buried there. So you can go in and visit all these prestigious tombs. So the dome, I think, is one of the highest in Paris with 83 meters, just to get a good feel. It's St. Peter's Basilica is 136 meters. It's still a very prominent building, and as it's built on top of the mountain Saint-Geneviève, it's very, you can see it from nearly everywhere in the city. So it's a very majestic and fairly imposing building, but not a church. Okay, so we started at the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève. Now let's move east towards the Lycée Henri IV. So what's it? So if you're not familiar with the French educational system, a lycée is basically a high school. In French, you go from primary school to something called the college, le collège, which is like junior high school. And then you go to lycée, which is high school. And the difference between between the collège and the lycée is that, at least for public school in France, you go to the collège that is closest to where you live, so that you don't choose, you can't select the collège, but lycées are it's like you enroll into a lycée depending on your grades. So it means that it's easy for a lycée to be ranked because they accept only the best lycée accept the best students. So the most prestigious lycée in France is the Lycée Henri IV. If your child goes to Henri IV, he is extremely gifted and probably is destined to greatness. So it was initially part of the Abbey Sainte-Geneviève, along with the library that we saw a few minutes ago. But during the French Revolution, all of this area was either destroyed or transformed. And what happened, it was transformed into the first public schools in France. Because until the French Revolution, education was managed by the church, but after that, it became part of the purview of the state. And that's where public schools were created. And very quickly, the most prestigious of the schools became Henri IV. So you can see it's prestigious and it's also beautiful. I mean, it's this is called the Clovis Bell Tower. So it's an actual 16th century tower. And you can see the courtyard, which looks basically like a cloister. And that's also because it used to be a religious edifice. And so I assume from those pictures that studying there must be a very enriching experience. So some of the most notable alumni. So you can see here that you have at least 3 Nobel Prizes. You have very famous directors, very famous philosophers, playwrights, novelists, and a little person called Emmanuel Macron, who is our current French president. So you can see that this is definitely not at everybody's the layman's high school. It really is the top. It really is like the creator of the future elite of Paris. And if your child is accepted at Henri IV, he is, as I said, destined for great things. So, okay. We were at Henri IV, so now we're going to stroll down. Let me just move this and go from here. So Rue Clovis is there, and then we are going to go down Rue Descartes to a place called la Place de la Contrescarpe. So La Place de la Contrescarpe is one of the oldest places in Paris, and it's very popular with tourists. It contains many cafes and mostly recent. However, the facade of some of the buildings still show signs of the place that it used to be. So it really is, if you want to spend like today, it's a beautiful day in Paris, and if you want to during the stroll, you can go and have an ice cream at the Place de la Contrescarpe. There are often music groups playing music. There's always a lot of different things happening. It really is a very lively place where people like to congregate. It's probably one of the liveliest places in the Fifth. And it really is charming to be there during the summer. So Contrescarpe nobody really knows why it's called the Place de la Contrescarpe, but there used to be in the medieval times, in the 13th century, Paris was surrounded by a wall of fortification, and built by the King Philip Augustus. And basically, Contrescarpe, this place was built on one of the side of the wall against the wall. And if you know a little bit of French, against me is contre, so it's Contrescarpe. Now, of course, the wall has entirely disappeared, but you can actually, let me just show you. You still have remains of that wall a little bit everywhere in the city. So let's just go back there. So you can see it's like a very, it's a typical it's a typical place in Paris, fairly small in diameter, really a place where people congregate, a little bit of nature, but not too much. Usually there's a fountain, there you go. And there's a lot of cafes. So you have La Petite Terre, Les Arts, Gaston. So really, it's a place where you go at the end of the day, around 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, you meet your friends and you have something called l'apéritif. If you know anything about French culture, that's really a sacrosanct part of French life, especially during the summer. You have l'apéro. So apéritif, and people shorten it to apéro, an apéro. So there are many different types of apéro. Of course, you have a beer. That's a very common drink, or you can have a glass of wine, red or white. You can also have something called a pastis. Pastis is licorice. Is it licorice? Is that licorice? Yeah. Licorice alcohol. I'm trying to find like the term. It's distilled licorice alcohol, exactly. And you just put a little bit, and you just like mix it with water, and it gives it like a very anise, very strong taste. And it's extremely strong, but very, very pretty good. And then you have something called a Kir Royal, which is white wine with cassis liquor, or like red fruit liquor, which is also very popular because it's slightly okay. I have apéro, un pastis, un kiroya, crème de, it's crème de cassis. Sorry, I was finding with difficulty my words. So yeah, those are the very popular aperitif, and you would definitely get it here, have it here, enjoying it with friends. So let me just go back to my, okay, so you have a fountain, and also one of the very popular things to get there. It's not very French, but it's extremely popular. It's ice cream. And of course you have Italian ice cream and French ice cream. And here at the Place de la Contrescarpe, Italian ice cream is offered. So it's like, like that very, very luscious, very creamy ice cream. And it's a very popular food at the Place de la Contrescarpe. So we talked about the will of Philip Augustus. So Philip Augustus is a very famous king, and we're not going to go into details of the story, but when he went to the Crusades in like the 12th century, he basically built a wall fortifying the city and protecting it against the House of Plantagenets. If you know a little bit of history, at that time, France and England were at war with each other, which is something that's going to repeat itself regularly throughout history. But at that time, there was really like a real opposition rivalry between the Anglo-Norman House of Plantagenet, which I think at the time was King John. And I think we are right around the time the Magna Carta was signed in England. And I think a lot of the opposition between Philip Augustus and King John led to the Magna Carta. So, but on his side of the channel, Philip Augustus was going to the Third Crusade, and he wanted to protect the city, which had become the French capital at that time. So he built a huge wall that was meant to fortify the already existing walls, and the left bank was built between 1200 and 1250. And the little piece of wall you see here is one of the few remains of that wall. So, which I think is absolutely incredible if you realize that these walls are nearly 1,000 years old. So that's pretty cool. Okay, let me just go back there. So now let's go down Rue Mouffetard. So when you are at La Place de la Contrescarpe, which is here, the main street that goes down and leads to the southern part of the 5th arrondissement is called La Rue Mouffetard. And the Rue Mouffetard is really like a mythical street in Paris. It's one of the oldest streets, and it's it's really one of the liveliest and oldest. Oh, there's a slight mistake, sorry, but it's one of the oldest and liveliest streets in the neighborhood of the 5th. But I think altogether throughout Paris, there really is no other street like the Rue Mouffetard. It's really very, like, the street is very narrow. It really feels and looks old. And it's actually one of the oldest streets in the city, because if you can read my text, it runs along the flank of the Mount Sainte Geneviève hill, and it was built on a Neolithic thoroughfare and was called Mount Citarius or Mount Citardus from Roman times. So at the time of the Romans, it already existed. And so historians think that Mouffetard comes from like a adaptation or deformation of Citarius or Citardus. So even it existed in Neolithic times. So this street is probably somewhere around 5,000 years old, which is fairly incredible. So human population has been living along this road for over 5,000 years. And I think that's quite astounding. So from the Middle Ages, the street became the center of the Bourg Saint-Médard. So, so it was already like a very significant part of the city. And it was because of its proximity to the Montagne Sainte-Geneviève and all of the religious edifices in that area. It was protected from the Baron Haussmann's redevelopment. So if you know anything about Paris, you might know that after the French Commune in 1870, the Baron Haussmann, who was like a French politician, was commissioned by the Third Republic to basically renovate Paris, which had been for like 1,000 years since the Revolution, an extremely volatile and violent city, where most of the revolutions that really shook the French society between the Revolution and the Commune of 1870 it started. And one way to counteract this extreme volatility in terms of politics was to basically destroy a lot of the small streets and basically open up Paris with like big avenues, big boulevards, where it would be easier to circulate and where things are easier to control and to contain. So from that moment of redevelopment and redesign, Paris changed, the population makeup of the city changed entirely from like a very revolutionary and very volatile city. As I said, it became more of a bourgeois and more sedate city. Of course, in 1968, during the French, the student uprising, things have changed, but the redevelopment of Paris through Baron Haussmann really changed the energy and the experience of the city. But it also, and so that's one thing, and another thing is just it changed dramatically the city, and a lot of the relics of the past were destroyed at that time. So that's why Paris is also, all things considered, and of course, looking through it from Americans' point of view, it's an old city. But if you look at it from the perspective of a city like Rome, which has a lot really old relics, Roman, medieval, Baroque, Paris is a fairly new city. And thank God, Rue Mouffetard was able to not be modified, because we have a few relics of the medieval past here and there, and it's nice, and it's a good thing. So it's a very busy city. You can see here and there people shopping. There are a lot of stores. You can see like a butcher and a rotisserie. You can see just there Picard frozen food. So it really is, even if it's an important part of the city historically, it has an everyday energy, which is nice. And it's always very pleasant to go there. It's not very chic. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. You might be used to the 6th or the 7th, or like the more glamorous neighborhoods of the western part of the city. But here things are, even though they're historically significant, I would say it's more like a popular everyday neighborhood, and it really does have a lot of the characteristics of everyday life in France. So one of the characteristics is that sometimes really strange mix of modern and old. So here you have, so this is again on Rue Mouffetard, where you have on the right-hand side of the screen, like a fairly old little edifice, little building, which I'm not 100% sure what it is, but I think it's interesting to see that this very nice little corner has on top of it like a graffiti, and on it, on the side of it, you have like a little mosaic with a little I think it was Space Invader type. If you remember the Atari games of eons ago, those were like the little characters of Space Invader, and this is actually an artist called Space Invader who does installations like that a little bit everywhere in the city of Paris. And that's one of his most famous, and is one of his most current one, like most recent, but that's what I mean, most recent creations. And for like La Petite Histoire, like the story around him is like nobody knows who he is. Nobody has ever seen his face, Space Invader. And on the other side, you have like a very typical cafe, but in a fairly modern environment. And that's also Rue Mouffetard. So it's like this very interesting mix of old and new, which you don't get in, like, would say, the more glamorous parts of the city, where things are a lot more coherent, more consistent, where you have more uniformity in architecture. Here, it's really the idea of matching and not mismatching, but like superposing and combining different architectural realities is really the choice that has been made. And again, here, I don't know why I've really put this there, but what was interesting for me is that it's also the combination of old and new, and it's not necessarily beautiful, but it's really, that's what I guess what I was really trying to convey with this slide, is that it's that's what Paris is. You know, we always have this idea of an extremely old and delicate city, but there is a certain reality, a certain modernity that really combines itself with the older part of the city to create something that is, I think, definitely typical of Paris. So also on Rue Mouffetard, you find public schools, of course, not only on Rue Mouffetard, all over Paris, but I found this building particularly beautiful, with the vine growing on the side of the building. And it made me think that it would maybe be interesting to share with you that these buildings are, scattered throughout the city, and they really are a staple of Parisian architecture. So they were built more or less between 1880 and 1920, and they stem from the Third Republic, who had already made lots of changes in Paris through the Baron Haussmann. They were also totally restructuring the French education system. So at that time, they decided that school would become compulsory. There was the abandonment of the single class system. If you remember, like, I think it still happens here and there in small cities, where basically everybody every level is put in the same class. Here it was the organization through classes of about, well, here they're putting 50 students, but I think it's less. Now it's between 25, and structured by age. And the building of hundreds of new buildings. So from 1889 and 1902, like nearly 200 schools were built, and they all have this like fairly typical standard architecture, usually with red brick or brown brick, and these like extremely high windows. And there's always like an inner courtyard and big classrooms with a lot of light. I mean, Victoria and I know these buildings because that's where we went to school when we were younger. But I think that was a particularly beautiful building, and I wanted to share it with you. So we're walking, and finally through at the end of our walk through Rue Mouffetard, we reached Place Monge. So Place Monge is, I think, really considered the heart of the Fifth. The Fifth is an interesting neighborhood in Paris because it's probably one of the only places where you don't have big streets, big avenues. It's really more like a collection of small streets, but there's one main street called La Rue Monge and one main square called La Place Monge. So who was Monge? Gaspard Monge is a French mathematician who is best known for the inventor of descriptive geometry. Don't ask me to explain what descriptive geometry is. I have no idea. But he's famous enough that, you know, a nice place square like this was, you know, named after him. So it's really like, I mean, and when I lived there, I was constantly, you know, walking around this neighborhood, and it's particularly famous for its open market on Sundays. So if you remember, if you were there last time, you know how important open markets are in Paris life. And this, I was able to show you one that was close to my apartment, but it was a fairly small one. But so this one is really, that's the real thing. That's a real open market where you have any type of produce, from meat, you have here from fruits and vegetables to fish, to cheese, to nuts and legumes. Any type of food that one might want to buy is available in an open market. And usually fresher, not necessarily is it less expensive, but fresher. And it really is. And so these are not pictures I took because it's only open on Sundays. So it was closed. It was not up when I went there, but and it opens really, really early on the Sunday. You can go shop. It opens around 7 and it runs until about 2 in the afternoon, and then it closes. And it's very, very, very busy. You know, you have to, if you want to buy everything at the open market, it might take you 2 or 3 hours to get through all of the lines. But it's definitely a staple of Parisian life. And it's also important right now. And really, when I was making the presentation, I had forgotten that it really is also important right now, because you know that tomorrow, that you might know that tomorrow there is the first round of votes for the legislative. We had the presidential election in April, and now we are voting for the deputies for the assembly. And it's a big, so tomorrow's a big day in terms of election, but open markets are also a center of political life, because if you want to meet people, that's where you go. So I know this man there, this kind of odd looking man, is actually a candidate, and who was on that picture, who was going around shaking hands and trying to find votes in his favor. But so again, the open markets are really an essential part of Parisian life, and I think one of the best parts of Parisian life. And I know a lot of people select where they want to live depending on how good the open market is in the neighborhood. Okay. So what time is it?
It is 10:45. And
oh, we have 15 minutes left.
Well, we have 15 minutes until some questions. But if you want to take a little moment really quickly, there's a quick question. Roseanne wants to know if on the Rue Mouffetard traffic is allowed.
No. Well, I think residents are allowed to drive in, but no, because I think some parts there's I don't think it's not no, and I don't think so. I think you can drive with your car if you're a resident, and only parts of it. I think some of them are close to the public. I think it's half pedestrian and half open to traffic. The lower part is open to traffic. The upper part is pedestrian, I think.
Thank you. Okay, that's the only question for now. So you can,
Okay.
unless somebody wants to ask a question at this moment. I don't see anybody raising a hand. Okay, so keep on going.
Okay. So we were Place Monge, and now we are going to go up the Rue Monge, turn right Rue Navarre to reach a place called Les Arènes de Lutèce. So the arenas of Lutetia. So what are the arenas of Lutetia? So it is, it's the most important ancient Roman remains from the, okay, I think there's like a from the era in Paris, together with the term of Cluny. Well, sorry about sometimes cut and paste is not the best way to go, but nevertheless, and this is not a great picture, but unfortunately, it's a picture I took, and let me go to this. It's a lot more, it's easier to, let me just put this up. So what are the Arènes de Lutèce? As I said, it's an old amphitheater, Roman amphitheater. Here is the place where gladiators and celebrations occurred in the town of Lutetia, which is the old Roman word for Paris. So if you might not know, but Paris, before becoming Paris, was a Gallo-Roman city that had been founded around the year, like the 1st century BC, when Caesar conquered Gaul and turned it into a Roman region, a Roman province. There was the word is province. And one of the main cities that was built at that time was Lutetia. So let me just go to so this is what it looked like at the time. So it's a fairly standard yet small amphitheater, but you would have games, you would have celebrations, you would have parades here. And it was, and let me show you this. So it's not a great picture, but I think it's very interesting in showing you how the layout of the city so this is like the 1st century AD. So it's the time of Augustus in Rome. It's the the island here is, of course, l'île de la Cité. So it's the center of Paris, and of course you don't have it, but now this is the island where Notre Dame is built, and that's the historical heart of the city. And this map, this view is facing south. So from here, you're facing south. And if you, let me just go down again. If you go down there, this is basically the 5th. So you have the amphitheater it's there. So that's the Arrêt de Lutèce where we are. And basically this is the mountain Sainte-Geneviève, La Montagne Sainte-Geneviève. And I'm not 100% sure, but here is probably where the abbey was built, on top of the hill, or maybe here. So it shows that this area was really the area that we've been walking through was the first area that was built in Paris. And that's why so many really old remains, old relics of the city are here. So it was probably here. That's probably the abbey was built there. So I think that's a fairly fast. So this is the 1st century. So this was 2000 years ago. So I think it's pretty, I find it fascinating to know that, it was already civilization was already there and bustling 2000 years ago. So let me just go back there. So and this is what it is today. And unfortunately, what's interesting here is that how basically it's part of the urban landscape. It really is. And you don't, I forgot, I mean, I think one of my images was lost in some of the changes, but what's really interesting is that if you go up Rue Monge, you don't see it because it's basically hidden by buildings. So you can really, and believe me, because I lived in this neighborhood, and I think I maybe realized 6 months in my living there that this building, these arenas were existed 5 minutes from where I lived. So they are extremely hidden from the rest of the city and can be easily missed, but they are one of the most fascinating faces of the city. This old Roman past, and it's probably it probably is the oldest part of the city. Although there's very few original parts. I think none of these things are original, but the circle in itself, like the arena, is in itself original. Okay. So now, we're going back down Rue de Navarre, and we're going to take Rue de Quatrefages. So again, it might not be of any interest to you, but I used to live here. I lived there 10 years, Rue de Quatrefages. It was a nice apartment. It was very nice. And we're going to walk to the mosque. So, sorry. So the mosque. So you are aware that there is a very large Muslim population in France. And that's basically due to the fact that in the 1850s, France, like many European countries, at one point decided that they wanted to colonize the rest of the world. England had colonized India, had colonized a large part of Africa, and it became part of the French colonizing project to colonize the northern part of Africa, which is called Maghreb, which was a Muslim culture. So France in the 1850s conquered, from the Ottoman Empire, conquered Algeria, Morocco, and Tunisia, and they became, and also other parts of Western Africa, like Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire, but those areas were had a mainly Muslim population. So from that time on, there was a fairly large Muslim population in Paris. So it became very, very quickly obvious that there needed to be places of worship for the Muslim population. But even though it was obvious, it took about 70 years to build the first mosque in France and in Paris. So the Grande Mosquée de Paris was built from between 1922 and 1926. And since its inauguration, it played an important role in promoting the visibility of Islam and Muslims in France. And it's the oldest mosque in metropolitan area. So before 1926, there were no mosques in France. Now there are many mosques in France, but this is still the most celebrated. And I think it's also the most beautiful. Let me again. So here is the central part of, so unfortunately, I'm going to be very honest with you, my knowledge of how a mosque is structured is limited. I know there's a tower, the minaret, and there's also, and I think here what you have in front of you, those are the quarters of worship. Where we were there, that's where the people go in to pray. That's the entry for the I won't say the faithful, I guess maybe that's the proper term. And this is like, those are the areas where the prayer occurs. So you have these beautiful pictures. So it is, even if you are inside of Paris, you are within Paris, within the mosque. It looks like it's a beautiful mosque with an inner courtyard. So the structure and the layout of a mosque is very standardized, and you need to have different areas. So wherever you are, many of them have the same structure. So there's always an inner courtyard open which gives an openness to the sky, on the sky, and you always have a minaret, which is technically where the iman, I think, maybe. I'm sorry, again, I'm very
The call to prayer.
the call to prayer. I'm very ignorant of Muslim faith, but that's where technically it is. The call to prayer is made. It's not made like that in Paris, but it's still there. I don't think you can visit it. And you have, of course, beautiful Islamic decoration. And this is something called the Zilige pattern, which is these beautiful flower geometric patterns, because of course Allah cannot be represented, so geometric and abstract and conceptual patterns are favored in Muslim mosques. But also, and here maybe we're going to go through maybe less historical and less culturally significant information, and maybe focus on another side of the mosque, which is their very famous restaurant. And they offer probably some of the best Muslim food in France. And this is what you have in front of you is the couscous. So the couscous is basically, it's a dish of rolled semolina. So it's like finely granulated rolled semolina. So it's very fine, which is steamed. And then you put on top of it a vegetable or meat stews, or just vegetable stew and a cooked and roasted meat. And it really is the ultimate staple of Maghrebi cuisine. So in Algeria, Tunisia, Mauritania, Morocco, and Libya. So Maghreb is basically all of Northern Africa. And I think Maghreb in Arab means where the sun sets. And Victoria will concur with me, it is an absolutely delicious meal. If you want to, if that, and it really is, I mean, like you eat Indian food in London, you eat Chinese food in San Francisco, you eat, well, of course you eat spaghetti in Rome, but you know, what you mean, like, it really is the exotic food de rigueur in France. It's the couscous, and you don't get a better couscous anywhere in the world, or anywhere else in the world. The other great thing about Paris is Vietnamese food, but that's maybe for another balade. So, and couscous, I did not know, was added to the UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage list in 2020. So there you go. It really is delicious.
And there are many, many couscous restaurants in Paris.
Yes. And so here you have, so that's the semolina. Yes, let me just give you, that's the semolina, that's the vegetable stew, and it's always done in this, with this like tomato broth, which is very good. And then, so you can have roasted eggplant, but you have this is a merguez. Merguez is a spicy lamb sausage, which is
Delicious.
Delicious.
If you eat meat, yes.
Of course, if you're a meat eater, it's but it's delicious. Then, and you can have, so you can also have chickpeas here. And I think that those are raisins, if I see correctly. And I think this is more meat and more. So yeah, it's very good, but it's, it's hearty food. So
And
it's
and the harissa sauce,
and you also have like harissa. Harissa is
the spicy
uh,
sauce.
it's well, harissa is actually like a chili pepper paste, which is then dissolved in water, and it turns into, and you put it a little bit everywhere to spice everything up. It's very good.
Okay, so James, you need to move on because we're at 11 now.
Okay. So sorry, I'm rambling. So okay, so the last, but we're nearly there. So the last part of the tour, and basically our final stop, is the Jardin des Plantes, the Garden of the Plants. So what is the Garden of the Plants? The Jardin des Plantes is the main botanical garden in France, and it's as well as the headquarters of the Museum of National Histoire Naturelle, which brings together the fields of botany, geology, mineralogy, paleontology, and comparative anatomy. So it was founded in 1635 by Louis XIII, but really developed into what it is today by a man called the Comte de Buffon, who served as head in 1739. So at that time, before colonization, Europe expanded, and their first interest was a scientific one. So basically, hundreds of botanists and other scientists were sent all over the world to collect samples of animals and samples of plants, and to basically gather everything together at the Jardin des Plantes. So here you have a beautiful, really, it's a gorgeous building, and that's a hothouse where you have samples of, I think this is the jungle, so it's like wet, hot forest. And you have a little bit different buildings all over the Jardin des Plantes with different types of biozones. So this is that's the building where all of the minerals and all of the animal samples are gathered. So if you're interested in any of that, you have like hundreds of specimens of insects, of animals that are represented there. You also have dinosaur remains. So it really is a fascinating place if you are interested in natural history. So that's Mr. Buffon. That's a 300-year-old tree, which is called a Sephora, which I'm not 100% sure what it is, but it's a Sephora. So, but like, I think the most incredible thing is that the tree is 300 years old and was planted by the man here. So interesting. And so the School of Botany in France has its own garden. So it really is also a place of knowledge and a place of teaching. And I think that's also important. And that's something you need to remember. The Jardin des Plantes is not just something for tourists. It's also a place of knowledge and research. And maybe this last photo of beautiful trees in the center of Paris, just to show that, Paris can also be an extremely green and extremely lush environment. And I love this picture, and I wanted to end our presentation with this. There you go. Sorry, I ran a little long. I think here and there I rambled a little bit, but thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for listening to me. I hope it was of interest.
Thank you, James. There's a couple of little questions here or comments. David shared that he suspends his vegan diet when he travels to Paris. Bonne idée, David. And Richard would like to know what is the current population of Paris, the number of people who live within Paris?
Within Paris, so within the walls, within the confines of the autoroute, le périphérique, which is this like big highway that circles around Paris, It's 2 million, and it's been fairly stable for, I mean, I think as long as I've known Paris, it's always been 2 million. But now there's a lot of talk of expanding Paris. And there's a, well, there's a project called Le Grand Paris, which is basically how can you create like more of like a, like that really takes into account the fact that the agglomeration of Paris is about 8 million people. So how do you create a cohesive urban planning that doesn't work on the opposition of Paris inside and Paris outside, and creates more like a harmonious global city? So there's a lot of, at one point we'll talk about it in another balade, because it's a very interesting way of reimagining Paris as a modern and large city.
Sure.
For sure.
Well, thank you for that. Does anybody have a
Yes.
question? You can unmute and ask a question now. I'm not quite sure who's, I heard somebody say yes. I don't know who that is, but go ahead and ask your question. All right, well, maybe.
No, there's I see another question. Maghreb in Arabic means where the sun sets, and it was given that because the Muslim world was, you know, basically went from Pakistan to Morocco, and that's where the sun set. It was the furthest the furthest place in West place. Oh God, sorry, I can't speak, but the furthest place in the West for the Muslim world.
Yeah. Indeed.
And that's what Maghreb means.
Can I make a quick comment, Victoria?
Yeah. Vas-y, Claire.
James, it's so good to meet you, her brother. I took Victoria's class and she taught us so much culturally about Paris. And I had the good fortune of visiting Paris in February this year. And one of the things I put on my list of things to do when I'm in Paris was to go to that restaurant called Culotte. It's a passage. It took me forever to find it. And it's like, oh, that's a passage. You know, I'm wandering around. But anyway, it was the best quiche I had in my whole life. So I don't know who told Victoria about that restaurant, but
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Good. And also they had another tart that I had. I mean, the food was just delicious. And I got there at 11:45. I had a seat, and then by noon, the line is out the door and down the passage waiting for people to buy their food. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Kyle.
Lucky you, a good quiche is a wonderful experience. Oh, I love quiche. I love quiche.
C'est bon. Not as good as couscous, though.
I know Victoria's very partial to couscous.
Absolutely. Anybody else? A comment? Otherwise, I want to thank you all for participating.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
It's
And
great. I love making these presentations. They're very fun. There's a lot of work to do, but it's great, you know, discovering new things about Paris. So it's a real opportunity for me to boost up and strengthen my knowledge of the city.
absolutely. And I think
Victoria,
Please.
could you please put the name of that restaurant in the chat?
Okay, hold on a second. Yeah, that it's a little place. Okay, so here we go, everyone. Yeah, a little place called Culotte, which I have not gone to because it's a recent little restaurant. And the reason why it came up is because in one of the classes we're reading a series of little books called Culotte that focuses on, you know, on women who made great contributions to culture and history, but, you know, mostly are unknown, you know, because people talk about men and don't talk about, you know, women's contributions. So in one of the classes, we've gone through several of the stories. And I was just doing some research online one day, and this little restaurant called Culotte came up, and I thought that was funny. And it looked like they had a very nice little, simple, but very tasty little menu. So I shared
Oh,
that with
It
students.
was.
Huh.
It
Et
was.
voila. I'm glad you checked it out, Claire.
I did. It was wonderful. There's so many places, but that's right. It's still top of my list to go back to that one.
Génial.
It's not like in a normal kind, I mean, it's a little bit off the beaten path, but it's worth it to go into these other neighborhoods that aren't so
Where is it?
touristy.
C'est où?
I believe it's in the Deuxième, the second,
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, okay, that's fine.
and there's a passage. And it kept saying, well, go to blah, 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 Rue de Passage. And I took pictures of all this construction because I was amazed in this neighborhood, how most people in the United States, when they build something, they have everything cleared and then, but here they have all this construction going on and people are kind of just sneaking in between the workers and their hard hats.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean.
You have to.
I mean,
Yeah.
Paris is always under construction, and you should see my street right now. Everything is under construction. It's either renovation, either they're cleaning the facades or building new things, but Paris is constantly under construction.
No, yeah.
So yeah, you have to live with it. And if you have to go, you have to be bold and go through the construction or you'll never get anywhere.
James,
Bon courage.
about 20 years ago, I was complaining all the time that all my photos had grues, those cranes in
yeah.
them.
Oh,
And our guide said, c'est la prospérité.
exactly,
That's a good one.
exactly.
I don't know if it's a prosperité. I think it's also the drawback of living in a city that is, as I said, 2,000 years old in some places. And, nothing lasts forever. So things constantly need to be mended. So, or cleaned. It's an extremely polluted city. So, facades get dirty very quickly.
Mhm.
So every building it's mandatory, has to be what it's called. The word is ravalé. I think every 10 years.
James, there's a question from Karen.
Mhm.
It's not exactly a question, but I wanted to mention that there's an excellent tiny little quiche restaurant on the Rue de Mouffetard. It's called La Maison de Tarte, and all they sell is couple of different kinds of quiche and what we call pie, tarte, and it's tiny. I mean,
Yeah,
a lot of people just go up, you can go up and get it to go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But it's right there on the Rue de Mouffetard.
Yeah, it's definitely. I wanted to put a few restaurants around Mouffetard, but Mouffetard is very. There are a lot of places like that. Like they're all, but it's more like one's experience of it. There's a lot of crêperie also. If you like crêpe, that's definitely the place to go. Rue Mouffetard, like good cheap food, like quiche, like crêpe, very satisfying and good for like a small light lunch.
Well,
Well,
after all
thank
this-
you. I mean, there's a lot to cover in that area. You did an incredible job.
Oh, thank you.
you.
Thank you so much. It
Well,
was, yeah.
definitely.
I love the neighborhood. I mean, I lived there 10 years, so I know, but I have to be honest, I hadn't, I moved from there in 2002, so a long time ago, but it was really nice going back there and just rediscovering a lot of the places I used to go to. So it was fun.
James, there's a comment from Karine. Merci, James. I did not know the bibliothèque was open to the public. We'll have to
Oh, you have
visit.
to go. You have to go. It's incredible. I mean, like if you're into medieval stuff, I am, but if you're like in old manuscripts and some of the stuff is just incredible. And also, I mean, like knowing that all the scholastics, philosophers, learned and taught at La Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève is just incredible. Peter Abelard, my God.
Absolument. Well, after all of this talk
Yeah.
of food, I'm gonna have to eat.
Victoria,
Oui, oui.
I have a quick question.
Oui,
and
vas-y, Elizabeth, go for it. Yeah.
I might get booed off, but the small town I come from in Connecticut, there was a guy that moved to Paris and he opened a restaurant called Breakfast in America. And I was wondering if James heard of it or have.
There was
I
breakfast. No, I've never heard of it, but I could look into it.
He has
Is it-
two-
I,
he has
excuse me,
It's
I'm
on the Rue
fairly
Mons, I believe.
familiar of,
Yeah, I
with
I
that
stayed in a
breakfast in
hotel right
America.
next door to
Okay,
it.
wait, wait.
and That was
Yeah.
20 years ago, so.
Hold on, one at a time. So Elizabeth, Breakfast in America is the
Wait.
name of the restaurant, and
Wait,
then I think Karen knows of it.
Yes, my daughter, who's been an expat in France, discovered it. And ironically, our grandson, who was born in Paris, who's 10 years old, he loves to go there because he can get American pancakes.
So
I
you
think
know-
I think there are two of them.
Yeah, he has two
Yeah,
locations.
there are two. There's one. So one Rue Monge, exactly. Rue Monge.
I went
Oh
to
no,
breakfast.
no, Rue des Écoles. No, Rue Monge.
No,
Rue
Rue
Monge.
des Écoles, oui, Rue des
Yeah,
Écoles.
well, okay.
that's where
Rue
my
des
hotel
Écoles.
was.
And the other one is it's Rue Pavé, Rue Malher. Ooh,
I-
so in fourth.
I
So
thought
yeah,
he had one in
but is it
the
like do they serve American food or is it just
American
it's
food.
All
like
American.
Like
Read,
diner-
read this.
Oh,
The newest
Let them-
one, let them eat pancakes.
Right.
It is so funny.
Oh, well,
So
he
funny.
wrote a book called Pancakes in Paris. Is that his new book?
This is the one from 2020 and it's the second book. Yes.
Oh, I
my
didn't know he
God.
wrote a second
And
book.
I got it at the library, Tucson Public Library, and I'll be returning it.
Okay. I didn't
Oh,
know
good, good.
that he wrote a second book, but
Yeah.
the first book was really interesting. Talked about his experiences opening a business in Paris.
This one too, this one too, but
Very
it's so
interesting.
I
funny.
bet.
He was put in jail once for breaking a regulation. I mean, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, opening a restaurant anywhere is complicated, but opening a restaurant in Paris is complicated.
Really, it was super, yeah,
I
amazing.
mean, there's just a lot of regulation and it's, and if you don't, if you don't master French really well, it can be, complicated.
Very tricky.
Wait,
There's a lot of like small fine print that you need to be aware of and that it's not necessary. Well, things have gotten much easier, but 20 years ago was probably a complicated task.
Yeah. So I was just always wondered if you had heard of it. So thank you guys. for
Actually,
sharing.
now I know that I didn't know the Place Monge one, but I know Rue Monge, no, but I had walked by the Rue Malher one.
Is one
second
of
one.
those
Maybe
in
both
the,
of these
the
are
Latin
fine.
Quarter? Is one in the Latin Quarter?
What? Well, Rue Monge is technically like where he is technically like the northern
Quartier
part of
Latin.
the Quartier Latin, and
Oh.
the other one is in the Marais.
Oh, okay. Thank
Rue
you.
Malher.
Merci.
Super.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay.
Merci.
Anything else before we call it a day?
No, it was wonderful. Thank you very much,
Thank
James.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
James. I know
Okay.
it takes you time and effort to do this, so we really
I
appreciate
mean, it's
it.
complicated because I'm not very good with versions and everything, so I constantly lose information. So,
Merci beaucoup.
It was
Merci
great.
beaucoup. Merci
Absolument.
de votre attention.
And then thank you to all of you for joining us. And we'll let you know the next time James, feels the urge to put something together. I
Yeah.
think he
Don't know
mentioned,
where I'm going to
he
do it.
mentioned
so-
the 19th arrondissement de
No,
Butte.
I changed my mind. We're going to
Oh,
do,
okay, never mind.
next time we do it, we're going to do Étienne Marcel, Rue Montorgueil, Le Sentier. It's
Okay.
basically going to be from la Place des Victoires to the Grand Rex.
Okay.
What
Génial.
arrondissement is that?
That's the second and
Second. Oh,
the-
okay.
the second and, well, basically the second.
So you can go to Coulotte.
There you go. You can make a
Did you
stop.
ever think
James.
about maybe doing Père Lachaise, the cemetery?
Sure. I mean, I don't know that area really well. I did live at Gambetta at one point, a long time ago, but
Okay.
um,
Well, there's a grave there, Abelard. Is that the same Pierre Abelard from Saint-Giev or whatever? When you mentioned,
Peter Abelard, he's like the scholastic philosopher, 12th century
yeah, but
philosopher.
there's two famous lovers who are buried at
Yes, it's exactly, it's
Okay,
him.
so
It's like, yeah,
there'll be a
Abelard,
connection.
Héloïse et Abelard, Héloïse.
Okay.
C'est ça.
Yes, the
Super.
same, the same.
Yes.
Well,
Okay. Au
putting
revoir,
two
tout
and
le
two
monde.
together. Okay, génial. Thank you,
Okay. Au
everyone.
revoir.
À la prochaine.
Au
À la
revoir.
prochaine. Salut, salut.
Chou-chou.
Au revoir.
Sorry, I missed it. Okay.